My name is Monica Price. I am 48 years old, and I live in View Park, Windsor Hills, a quiet residential neighborhood in Los Angeles, where many middle-class African-American families choose to put down roots for a lifetime. For 6 years, I devoted my entire life to caring for my husband, Adrian, the man doctors declared completely paralyzed after a severe accident. Everything truly changed 3 days ago. That day, I brought Adrian to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center because he had a respiratory infection. I thought it would be just another routine checkup, like dozens before it. But when Dr. Matthew Collins stepped out of the examination room, I immediately knew something was wrong. The look on his face is something I will never forget. The doctor looked straight into my eyes. His voice trembled, not from cold, but from tension. "Mrs. Price, call the police right now." At that moment, I didn't understand why. But within hours, I was forced to face a truth that could destroy my entire world. The truth about 6 years of sacrifice, about the people I trusted most, and about myself, whether I was strong enough to survive it. But before I tell you what happened at the hospital that day, let me go back and tell you what my life had become over those 6 years, and why Dr. Collins's words made me feel both relieved and paralyzed with fear. If you asked me what my life was like before that day, I would answer honestly. It was an endless chain of sacrifice and unrelenting devotion. Every morning, I woke before dawn, around 5:30. My body ached constantly from sleeping on a backless sofa placed next to Adrian's hospital bed in the living room. No matter how exhausted I was, the first thing I did was smile at him. "Good morning, baby. Today is Tuesday, full-body bath day." My life ran on routines measured down to the minute. Bathing Adrian wasn't just about cleaning. I had to heat the water to the exact temperature, prepare towels, unscented neutral soap, and position the portable tub beside the fixed hospital bed in the living room, where it had been since he was discharged. Everything had to be ready before I began. "Baby, let me take off your pajamas, okay?" I did everything with a care honed over years, lifting him correctly, supporting his neck, moving him without causing pain, and most importantly, preserving his dignity, even in the most private moments. Before the accident, Adrian was a talented architect, energetic, decisive, broad-shouldered, with hands that once drew designs admired across his firm. Now all of that was trapped inside a brutal stillness. They said a pickup truck ran a red light while Adrian was crossing Crenshaw Boulevard. I was in San Diego attending an education conference at the time. I used to be an elementary school teacher, and I have never stopped blaming myself for not being there that day. As I gently washed Adrian's back with a soft sponge, I kept talking to him as I had for years. "Do you remember what day it is? Today is our 27th wedding anniversary." Doctors said Adrian could still hear. They taught us a simple communication system. 1 blink meant yes. 2 blinks meant no. That was the last thread connecting us. Just as I finished drying Adrian, my phone rang. It was Felicia, his sister. "Hi, Monica. How is Adrian today?" Her voice sounded sweet. "We're doing his morning bath. Everything's normal." "That's good. I'll stop by this afternoon. I need to talk about something important." "About what?" "I'd rather talk in person." "It's about our parents' house paperwork." After hanging up, I noticed something different in Adrian's eyes. He was focused. Too focused. It made me uneasy. "Are you in pain?" "Blink once if yes, twice if no." Adrian blinked twice, slowly. No pain, but clearly, something frightened him. I said, "Felicia is coming this afternoon. I'm sure you'll be happy." But when I mentioned Felicia's name, I thought I saw a flash of fear pass through his eyes. I told myself I was just sleep-deprived. I was feeding Adrian breakfast, oatmeal with honey and pureed orange juice, when there was a loud, insistent knock at the door. "It's Dorian, Adrian's cousin. I need to talk to you, Monica." Dorian, the man who always appeared at the worst possible moments, with business proposals that never benefited anyone but himself. I opened the door. Dorian walked in without waiting for an invitation. An expensive suit, a gleaming Rolex, and an arrogance that irritated me instantly. "Monica, you look exhausted. Can we talk privately?" "Adrian is eating. Say what you need to say." Quickly. Lowering his voice, Dorian said, "I'm here to talk about Uncle Robert's inheritance." He spoke about the trust fund left to Adrian, with the condition that it be used solely for treatment. Then he stared straight at me. "You spend every day caring for my cousin, wasting your life. That money could be put to better use." "I'm using it exactly as Uncle Robert intended," I replied coldly. Dorian immediately shifted tactics, talking about experimental treatment overseas, then sliding into another proposal, investing in a specialty clinic that he himself would manage. Adrian would receive the best care, and I would finally get a break. I looked him straight in the eye. "There is no we, Dorian." I refused. Dorian clenched his fist but kept a fake smile. "This isn't over, Monica. I'll be back, with paperwork, with lawyers if necessary. You're selfish. You think you're the only one who cares about Adrian? Goodbye, Dorian." The door closed. I turned back. Adrian was staring at me, eyes wide, and I could swear there was fear in them. "Don't worry, baby," I whispered. "No one gets to decide for us." The rest of the morning passed in routines: physical therapy to prevent muscle atrophy, reading, today it was the autobiography of Malcolm X, and playing classic jazz, Miles Davis, John Coltrane. As I did these things, I remembered Adrian before the accident. We first met at an art exhibition in Leimert Park. I was 21, freshly graduated. Adrian was 23, working at a small but ambitious architecture firm. He asked me, "What do you see in this painting?" I said, "I see community, connection." He nodded. "Yes." "But do you see the loneliness? Everyone stands together, yet each looks in a different direction. That's Los Angeles, a city of lonely dreams." We talked for 3 hours that night. Architecture, education, dreams of uplifting the Black community. Adrian wanted to design affordable housing for families of color. I wanted to teach children to love themselves in a world that constantly judged them. 2 years later, we married at First AME Church, with Pastor Jenkins officiating. My mother cried throughout the ceremony. Adrian held my hand and vowed to love me until the final day. 27 years later, he was still keeping that promise, just not in any way we had imagined. My phone buzzed. It was Kiana, my sister. "Monica, how is Adrian today?" "Tired, as usual." She hesitated. "Have you heard anything from Tony?" Tony, my other sister, had been missing for 2 years. Police investigated. Nothing was found. She vanished as if into thin air. "Nothing new?" I replied. Kiana suggested hiring a better private investigator. I asked, "With what money? Everything I have goes to Adrian's care." Lowering her voice, Kiana said, "I wanted to talk to you about something. You should consider placing Adrian in a specialized care facility." I snapped. "You too? Did Dorian talk to you?" She denied it, but repeated that I needed rest, needed part of my life back, especially with Tony's case still unresolved. I was exhausted. My family was always pressuring me to let go, to place Adrian in someone else's hands. "I have to go," I said, ending the call. "Adrian is about to wake up." After feeding Adrian lunch, I helped him rest, and that was when I noticed something strange, a medicine bottle on the bedside table I had never seen before. Part of the label was smudged, as if intentionally. "What is this, Adrian?" I asked, holding it up. His reaction made my heart seize. Adrian's eyes widened, and he began blinking rapidly, chaotically, completely breaking our communication code. "Calm down, baby," I said, my heart pounding. "Did someone give you this medication?" Adrian blinked once. "Yes." "Felicia?" 2 blinks. "No." "Dorian?" 1 long blink. "Yes." My blood boiled. Dorian had been giving Adrian medication behind my back? I put the bottle in my bag. I would take it to the hospital for analysis. That afternoon, Felicia arrived right on time, carrying a thick folder. "Hi, Monica. How are you today? As usual. Felicia walked over to Adrian and took his hand. Hi, Adrian. You look well today. But for the second time that day, I sensed something wrong. Adrian wasn't happy. He was tense, almost terrified. Felicia spread out the documents. About our parents' house. I think we should sell it. I froze. Sell it? But that house... Sentiment doesn't pay bills, Monica, she said coldly. That money would be good for Adrian's treatment. Again, Dorian, Kiana. Now Felicia. Adrian would never want to sell it, I said firmly. Adrian can't make decisions right now, Felicia replied chillingly. You have medical power of attorney, but when it comes to assets, I have a say too. I said I needed to consult a lawyer. Felicia answered, I already have. These are preliminary papers. You just need to sign as Adrian's legal representative. I didn't touch the documents. Something felt deeply wrong. I need to review everything and consult my own lawyer. There's no time. The buyer is only waiting until the end of the month. I'm sorry, I'm not signing today. For a brief moment, Felicia's face changed, contained fury, almost animalistic. Then she smiled again, as if nothing had happened. As you wish. But think carefully. That money would be good for all of us. Before leaving, Felicia leaned down and whispered something into Adrian's ear. His face shifted from fear to despair. When we were alone, I asked, What did Felicia say to you? Adrian blinked rapidly. Did she threaten you? One blink. Yes. About selling the house? Two blinks. No. Uncle Robert's trust fund? One blink. Yes, my heart turned to ice. Something serious was happening, and Adrian was in danger. That night, after Adrian fell asleep, I carefully reviewed the documents Felicia had left. And then I went numb. Inside was a forged power of attorney bearing my signature, granting Felicia full control over Adrian's assets, including the trust fund. The date on the document, 3 months earlier, someone had forged my signature. With trembling hands, I called Dr. Collins. I'm sorry to call so late, but this is urgent. I need Adrian examined tomorrow morning. I found unknown medication, and his family is involved in too many suspicious actions. He replied, Bring him to Cedars-Sinai early in the morning. I'll conduct a full evaluation and analyze the medication. That night, I barely slept. For the first time in 6 years, I doubted everything. What if the accident was never an accident? What if Tony's disappearance was connected to this? What if my 6 years of sacrifice were only part of a dark plan I had never seen? The next morning, I prepared Adrian early. As I dressed him, I thought I saw a tear roll down his cheek. Don't be afraid, baby, I whispered. I will protect you. But deep down, I was the one most afraid. And I kept that promise. That morning at Cedars-Sinai, doctors began examining Adrian. Just a few hours later, I heard the words that sent my entire life down a path with no return. In the next part, you will learn why Dr. Matthew Collins told me to call the police, and what horrifying truth had been hidden for 6 long years. If you're still here, don't leave. What comes next, there is no turning back. The drive to Cedars-Sinai that morning was taut as a drawn wire. Every red light yanked me back to what they called the accident that had put Adrian in this condition. Every turn reminded me of the twists of the last 6 years, misunderstandings, sacrifices, and the things I had believed without ever daring to question. I drove my old Honda Accord down San Vicente Boulevard. The Los Angeles morning sun cut across the windshield at such a blinding angle that I had to squint. Adrian lay in the back seat, secured with a seatbelt and support pillows. I glanced at him through the rearview mirror, an instinct that had become second nature. Baby, I know you're scared, I said softly, but we need to know what those pills are. Dr. Collins will help us. Adrian blinked once. Yes, he agreed, but in his eyes there was still a fear I couldn't name. Stopped at the red light at the Burton Way intersection, memory surged again, the story Felicia told 6 years earlier. She said Adrian was crossing Crenshaw Boulevard at around 6 in the evening when a black pickup truck ran the red light and slammed into him. The driver fled. No witnesses, no cameras. That day, I was in San Diego attending a workshop on teaching reading and writing to elementary school children. I remember the phone vibrating in the middle of a small group discussion, Felicia's name on the screen. "Monica, you need to get back to Los Angeles right now. Adrian had an accident. A truck hit him. He's at Cedars-Sinai. Hurry!" I drove like a madwoman from San Diego back home. 2.5 hours felt like 20. By the time I reached the hospital, Adrian was unconscious. And the doctor who delivered the diagnosis wasn't Dr. Collins, but another physician, someone I never saw again, Scott Harlan. I remember him clearly. A white man around 45, salt and pepper hair, a decisive but icy voice, utterly lacking in empathy. He spoke about Adrian the way someone speaks about an item in a file. "Mrs. Price, your husband has severe damage to the C5 to C6 vertebrae. He will be paralyzed from the neck down, permanently." I collapsed right there in the hallway, crying like a child. Felicia held me, stroked my hair, and whispered, "Everything will be okay, Monica. We'll get through this together." But looking back now, one detail makes my blood run cold. Felicia was at the hospital before I arrived. She was there before I even sped back from San Diego, while Felicia lived in Pasadena, which was farther away than I was when you count from San Diego. How did she know so fast? How did she get there so quickly? The GPS voice pulled me out of the memory. Cedars-Sinai Medical Center is ahead. I turned into the parking structure, my heart pounding. When I lifted Adrian out of the car and settled him into the wheelchair, my hands shook so badly I had to take several deep breaths just to steady myself. I leaned down close to his ear. "No matter what happens in there, I'm still here with you. I won't let anyone hurt you again." Adrian blinked twice, slowly, deliberately. Not exactly yes or no, more like gratitude. Dr. Matthew Collins was waiting in the urgent care unit. He was a black man around 50, tall and broad, with gentle eyes behind horn-rimmed glasses. He had become Adrian's primary physician about 2 years earlier, after Scott Harlan abruptly moved overseas. "Good morning, Mrs. Price," he said warmly. "Adrian, today I'm taking care of you." He examined Adrian carefully. I waited, unconsciously gripping my bag with the pill bottle inside, as if it were a silent piece of evidence proving my instincts were real. After the initial exam, Dr. Collins said they needed blood tests and a neurological evaluation, which would take a few hours. I handed him the pill bottle. "Doctor, I found this at home. I don't remember you prescribing anything new." Dr. Collins took the bottle, inspected it closely, and his expression darkened. "This didn't come from me. I'm sending it for analysis immediately." While waiting, I called our family attorney, Marcus Thompson, who had worked with the Price family for decades, and told him about the power of attorney with the forged signature. "Mrs. Price, this is extremely serious," he said. "I'll prepare a complaint this afternoon, and I advise you to contact the police." The hours that followed crawled by with cruel slowness. In the sterile waiting area, I watched people pass by as if they belonged to another world. A young couple holding hands, the wife visibly pregnant, an elderly man pushing his wife's wheelchair, both of them smiling softly, a mother holding a crying child, soothing them in a gentle voice. I envied them. I envied their normalcy, because they didn't have to live in my world, a world of lies, unknown pills, and a simmering fear that never let go. I opened my phone and scrolled through old photos. Adrian and me at Griffith Observatory. Adrian at an architecture exhibition beside a model of affordable housing for the Watts community. Adrian at church in a navy suit, his arm around my waist after Pastor Jenkins's sermon. Then came the photos after the accident. Adrian in a hospital bed with a breathing tube, machines beeping. Adrian lying motionless at home in the living room. Adrian in a wheelchair staring into empty space. 6 years, 2,190 days, 54,960 hours, millions of seconds I had traded away. Had all of it been built on a lie? I closed my eyes and tried to pray. If I had been deceived, give me the strength to face it. If Adrian was in danger, protect him. And if the person I loved betrayed me, show me what I must do to forgive. But there was no answer. Only the hum of the air conditioning and the cold sound of footsteps in the hallway. Around 2 p.m, Dr. Collins stepped out of Adrian's room. Beside him was a woman in a white coat, name badge, Reena Patel, neurologist. Both of them looked at me with an expression that wasn't pity or worry, but shock, and something like anger. Dr. Collins approached, his voice different, as if he were forcing each word into place. "Mrs. Price, we need to talk." "Come with me to the consultation room," he said, when I jumped up, asking if Adrian was okay. And in that moment, I followed them on my own 2 feet, yet it felt like I was walking into a room where my entire life was about to be stripped bare. There are moments when you don't know what terrifies you more, the fear that the person you love might die, or the fear that the person you love was never the person you thought. If you've listened this far, please don't leave, because the next sentence made me understand. For 6 years, I hadn't just been caring for a patient. I had been living in a cage locked from the outside. The consultation room was small and suffocating. 4 beige walls, 1 table, 3 chairs. Dr. Patel closed the door. Dr. Collins braced his hands on the table, his fingers trembling slightly. "Monica," he said, using my first name, his first time not saying Mrs. Price. "What I'm about to tell you is very hard to explain." "You're scaring me, doctor. What is wrong with Adrian?" My throat was dry and raw. "We ran an EMG, MRI scans, blood work." He paused and looked at Dr. Patel. She nodded. Then Dr. Collins looked straight at me and said each word clearly. "Your husband is not paralyzed, Monica." My mind couldn't latch onto reality fast enough. The room seemed to spin. I gripped the edge of the table to keep from falling. "What?" Dr. Patel spoke firmly. "There is no spinal cord damage, and Adrian's muscles do not show the level of atrophy consistent with 6 years of immobility. His muscles show signs of recent use. But I see him every day. He doesn't move. I communicate with him through blinking," I blurted, almost panicked. Dr. Collins sat across from me. "Listen to me. We found traces of substances in his blood, primarily benzodiazepines. The dosage was controlled very cleanly, enough to create the appearance of paralysis and lethargy, but not so much that it would immediately endanger his life." My whole body went ice cold. "So, you're saying Adrian has been pretending for 6 years?" "Not entirely," Dr. Patel clarified. "He's been systematically drugged. Not enough to truly paralyze him, but enough to make him look that way. Someone has been keeping him in that state, and it appears he has been cooperating." Shaking, I pulled out the pill bottle and handed it over. Dr. Collins looked at it and said with certainty, "I didn't prescribe this, and it didn't come from any doctor at this hospital." My voice caught. "Who has been giving him that?" "The police will have to determine that," Dr. Collins said. "But right now, we need to call the authorities. This could be medical abuse, possibly even tied to intent to cause serious harm." He looked straight into my eyes and stressed each word. "Monica, call the police. Right now." We called the police from the office phone. While waiting, Dr. Collins explained. The medication pattern was extremely specific, the dosing almost professional, enough to keep Adrian lethargic without being obvious in routine checks. I said I brought Adrian in every 2 months. How could no one have noticed? Dr. Patel answered, "It's possible someone adjusted the dosage before appointments. By the day of the visit, the levels drop enough for everything to look consistent with the diagnosis." Dr. Collins added another detail that chilled me. His medical appointments have become less frequent over the past year. I swallowed hard. Felicia managed them. She said she was helping me, so I could rest more. Every piece in my mind began to click into place, and that was more terrifying than when they didn't. In less than 15 minutes, the police arrived. Among them was a female investigator around 40, so calm the very air seemed to shift. "Mrs. Price, I'm Detective Elaine Wu, Los Angeles Police Department, Major Crimes Division. I need you to tell me everything from the beginning." I told her for nearly an hour. The accident, Felicia's call, the location on Crenshaw Boulevard, the black pickup truck, no witnesses, no cameras, Dr. Scott Harlan, the nurse Laura whom Felicia fired, Dorian Blake constantly bringing up the trust fund, the $3 million trust fund designated only for medical expenses and managed by me and Attorney Thompson, the Victorian-style house in View Park, Windsor Hills on Don Lorenzo Drive, and Toni Moore, my adopted younger sister, who disappeared 2 years ago after saying she suspected Felicia. Detective Wu closed her notebook. She said they would reopen the investigation into Toni and that she wanted to speak with Adrian. I asked to be present. Dr. Collins also insisted I stay so Adrian would feel safe. Detective Wu agreed. When I stepped into Adrian's room, I stopped cold. His eyes were open, more alert than I had seen in years. Our eyes met. Not love the way I had imagined, not quite clear guilt either. I saw a deep, instinctive fear, the kind that comes from living too long under threat. "Mr. Price, I'm Detective Elaine Wu. Do you understand me?" Adrian gave a small nod. That single movement was enough to steal my breath. Detective Wu asked with gestures, "Felicia?" Adrian nodded. "Dorian Blake?" Adrian nodded. "Anyone else?" Adrian closed his eyes as if gathering strength, then tried to speak. One word came out, raspy and weak, but clear. "Harlan." My blood ran cold. The doctor who diagnosed him as paralyzed, and then disappeared. Detective Wu said they would assign security to Adrian's room, send officers to my house to secure the scene and search for evidence. From now on, I was not to contact anyone in my husband's family. They would say Adrian had been admitted due to respiratory complications to conceal what had been discovered. They needed the suspects to believe everything was the same while the investigation moved forward. Detective Wu left. I stayed with Adrian. The silence between us was heavy as lead. I stepped closer, not knowing whether to look at him as my husband or as a stranger stepping out from behind a 6-year mask. "Adrian, why?" I whispered. He looked at me, eyes wet. He tried to speak, slowly, painfully, and finally he forced out a name. "Toni." Cold spread up my spine. "What do you know about Toni?" I asked, leaning in close. Adrian swallowed with difficulty, then said as if speaking it was a sin, "They killed her." Everything inside me collapsed. At that moment, a nurse came in and asked me to step out so they could clean Adrian up and run additional tests. I stumbled into the hallway and leaned against the wall, just to breathe. Toni was dead. Adrian was not paralyzed. 6 years of my life had been given to a lie, and I still didn't understand. Why? Dr. Collins handed me a cup of water and urged me to go home and rest for a bit. I didn't want to leave Adrian, afraid they would hurt him. The doctor said there were police stationed there, and the hospital was monitoring him closely. I could go pack and come back. They would set up a comfortable chair so I could stay overnight. The drive home was surreal. When I arrived, 4 officers were already waiting at the door. While they searched, I packed. Clean clothes for Adrian and for me, toiletries, the book I always read to him. The mechanical motions kept me from going insane. In the sock drawer, I found a small key. I didn't remember ever seeing it. The officers photographed it and placed it into an evidence bag. It looked like a key for a safe or a lockbox. Then they asked about items Felicia might have used when she visited. I led them to the living room. We didn't find anything until one officer pulled a small suitcase out from under the bed. I didn't recognize it. We opened the suitcase. Inside were documents, an old phone, and the thing that made my blood freeze, Toni's favorite bracelet, the birthday gift I had given her. The police took the phone and powered it on. The battery was nearly dead, but it still worked. In the photo gallery were images that made my legs give out. Toni sitting in a chair, clearly restrained, and beside her, Felicia and Dorian, smiling as if showing off a trophy. "Oh my God," I whispered, my stomach twisting as if I might vomit. They called Detective Wu. I had only one thought left. Tony was really dead, wasn't she? When I returned to the hospital, it was nearly evening. Detective Wu was already waiting. "We've issued arrest warrants for Felicia Price and Dorian Blake," she said. "And we're tracking Scott Harlan through Interpol." I asked about Tony. Detective Wu said they still hadn't found her, but the images were extremely strong evidence, and they were expanding the search. I asked to see Adrian. Detective Wu nodded, then paused. "There's something you should know." He's starting to speak more clearly, and what he's saying is very concerning. "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart tightening. "It's best you hear it from him," Detective Wu said, looking straight at me. "But brace yourself, Mrs. Price. This goes much deeper than we ever imagined." I stepped into Adrian's room with my heart pounding like war drums. The hospital's cold white light spilled across his face, the face I had looked at every day for 6 years. And yet in that moment, I saw him like a stranger. What stunned me more than anything was this. Adrian was sitting propped up, a posture I had not seen once since the accident. Detective Elaine Wu stood beside the bed, notebook in hand. She nodded as I sat down in the chair next to Adrian. The air in the room thickened, as if one hard breath could shatter everything. "Monica." Adrian's voice was hoarse, but far clearer than I had ever imagined. Hearing my name from his lips after 6 years of silence made me want to cry and scream at the same time. I swallowed, forcing myself to stay calm. "I'm here," I said, my voice smaller than I meant it to be. "Are you sure ready to tell me?" Adrian glanced at Detective Wu. "I want to speak to my wife first. Just us." Detective Wu hesitated. "Mr. Price, this is a criminal investigation. I need to hear—" "My wife deserves to hear the truth from me first," Adrian cut in. His voice was so strong that even I couldn't believe it belonged to the man who had lain silent for 6 years. "She gave me 6 years of her life." Detective Wu looked at me. I nodded, almost pleading. "Please, Detective, give us a few minutes." She paused one more beat, then agreed, stepping outside but staying right by the door, leaving it slightly open, private enough for us, but still safe. When it was just Adrian and me, he reached out and took my hand. Not the way I used to place his hand on mine. He did it himself. For the first time in 6 years, I felt a real squeeze from my husband's hand. My heart clenched. "Monica, you have to believe me," Adrian began, tears spilling over. "There was no accident. None." Each word sliced straight into my chest like a blade. "No accident?" I heard my own voice trembling. Adrian gave a small nod. "Felicia poisoned me at a family dinner." I went rigid. Old memories flared instantly. 6 years ago," he continued, his voice broken but clear. "That day you were in San Diego, and I went to Felicia's house for dinner. She said she wanted to discuss selling our parents' house." I nodded. I had told Adrian not to go, because something like that should have been decided together. But he said it was just a normal family dinner. I took a sip of the wine Felicia poured, Adrian went on. About 20 minutes later, I started feeling dizzy. Dorian was there, and there was another man, Dr. Harlan. I'd never met him before. A shiver ran through me. Then what? When I woke up, I was at Cedars-Sinai. Adrian shut his eyes as if dragging himself through a nightmare. Harlan was standing by the bed. He said if I didn't cooperate, they would kill you. My lungs felt crushed. They threatened to kill me? Adrian nodded, tears falling without stopping. They showed me photos of you being followed, men with weapons. Harlan said they could make your death look like an accident. Any time. I covered my mouth, fighting not to let a sound escape. They said the plan was simple, Adrian continued. I would pretend to be paralyzed. You would manage the trust fund for my medical care, and they would siphon the money little by little. If I refused, you died. If I tried to warn you, you died too. Oh, God. I pressed my free hand to my forehead, feeling like my skull was about to split. Adrian, why didn't you find some way to let me know? Adrian's voice caught. You think I didn't try? I tried so many times, but Felicia was always there, always watching. He took a deep breath. At first, when Nurse Laura was still coming, I tried blinking strangely, tried signaling so she would suspect something, but Felicia noticed. And then, Felicia fired Laura. A memory snapped into place. Felicia saying Laura was too expensive, that I already knew how to do everything. I believed her. My throat tightened. And Tony? I asked, fearing the answer more than anything. Adrian closed his eyes, tears streaming down his cheeks. Tony started coming more often, helping you take care of me. Tony is smart, Monica. She noticed things weren't right. She checked my medications. She noticed Felicia always showed up before medical appointments. I whispered, almost blaming myself. She did tell me. She suspected Felicia, but I thought she was just worrying too much. They took her, Adrian said, his voice so painful it sounded torn out one word at a time. Dorian and Felicia. They showed me photos of Tony being beaten, to keep me quiet. They said if I didn't keep acting, Tony would die. And you would too. I shook so hard I couldn't hold back my tears. So now, I forced myself to ask, is Tony still alive? Adrian shook his head very slowly. I don't know. The last time I saw Tony was in a photo, more than a year ago. After that, they stopped showing me. He swallowed hard. They only said Tony stays alive because you behave, but I think he didn't finish. He didn't have to. The door opened softly. Detective Wu stepped in at that exact moment, as if she had given us just enough time to touch the truth without breaking apart right there. She looked at Adrian. Mr. Price, I need you to be clear about the trust fund and why they did all of this. Adrian wiped his tears and drew a breath, as if preparing to step into something even darker. The trust fund from Uncle Robert wasn't just savings, he said. My uncle knew something about Dorian. What? Detective Wu's pen was already poised. Uncle Robert used to be the chief accountant for Dorian's construction company, Blake Construction. That company won multiple city housing projects for low-income residents in Los Angeles. But my uncle discovered they were falsifying invoices. How? Detective Wu asked. Adrian stared straight ahead. The contract said they would build 500 affordable apartments in Watts for $15 million. But in reality, they only built it using $6 million. Cheap materials, poor quality. The remaining $9 million was split with city officials. My scalp prickled with cold. This was no longer just family. This was a network. Detective Wu wrote fast. Do you know which officials? My uncle mentioned names, Adrian said. Councilman Douglas Harris, the one responsible for the Watts district, the director of the Housing Bureau. I don't remember the name. And a few others. My uncle kept evidence as life insurance. Detective Wu looked up. Where's the evidence? Adrian answered immediately, as if he had memorized it through years of suffering. In a hidden safe in my parents' house, the house Felicia wants to sell. My heart lurched. Suddenly, everything snapped into focus. Terrifying, but clear. I murmured, that's why Felicia was pushing so hard to sell the house. Not for money, but for the evidence. Yes, Adrian confirmed. If the house gets sold, they can grab the evidence before the new owner ever finds it. But with me paralyzed and you as the guardian, they needed your signature. And they forged my signature, I said, thinking of the power of attorney. Detective Wu looked straight at us. Is that house safe right now? Is anyone living there? No, Adrian replied. It's been empty since my parents passed. We planned to renovate and rent it out, but after the accident, everything was put on hold. Detective Wu pulled out her phone, her voice decisive. We have to go there immediately. If Felicia and Dorian know we're investigating, they'll try to destroy evidence. In that moment, I want you to picture what I felt. I had just learned my husband was not paralyzed, and I had also just learned my life had been trapped in something far bigger, not just the greed of a few relatives. Some truths don't break in one clean snap. They break like countless small shards slicing skin, heart, memory. And the most frightening part is this. Once you touch their secret, you're no longer an outsider. You become a target. While Detective Wu arranged the search warrant, I turned back to Adrian. I needed to know everything, no matter how much it hurt. Was anyone else involved? I asked. Do you know? Adrian fell silent for a long beat. He looked down at our hands clasped together as if he didn't want to say what came next. Monica, there's someone else, he said softly, but it made me more afraid. Someone you won't want to believe. My stomach tightened. Who? Adrian looked at me as if apologizing before he said it. Kiana. My sister's name fell from his mouth like a slap. No, I blurted. It can't be Kiana. She's always been there for me. Kiana managed my appointment schedule this past year, Adrian said slowly, like he was afraid I would break. Remember? She volunteered to help because you were so exhausted. I remembered. I had believed it was care. But really, Adrian continued, she was making sure the appointments were set up the right way, so they could adjust my dosage before every visit. I shook my head, as if shaking it could push the truth away. No, Kiana can't. She loves me. She cares about me. She has debt, Adrian said. I heard them talking. Kiana has 2 kids about to start college. She makes around $55,000 a year as a nurse. Dorian promised her $500,000 if she helped. I went numb. Every sentence Kiana had said in the past suddenly appeared under a different light. The times she urged me to place Adrian in a nursing facility. The times she told me I needed to get my life back. I had thought it was love. But maybe it had been a plan. I forced myself to keep going, even though my throat burned. And Laura, the first nurse? No, Adrian answered immediately. Laura was real. That's why Felicia fired her. Laura was too careful, too attentive to details. She would have noticed quickly. Just then, Detective Wu returned, her face tight as a drawn wire. We have the search warrant for the house. A team is on the way to Don Lorenzo Drive. Mrs. Price, we need the exact location of the hidden safe. Adrian answered immediately, with a clarity that was terrifying. In the living room, there's a brick fireplace. The 3rd brick from the left, the 5th row up from the bottom. It can be removed. Behind it is a small compartment with a safe. Detective Wu asked, How do we open it? We need a key and a code, Adrian said. Uncle Robert gave me the key right before he died. He said only to use it in an emergency. I startled. I found a key in the drawer today. The police took it as evidence. Detective Wu nodded. Good. And the code? Adrian closed his eyes, as if searching a locked drawer of memory. May 18th, 1992, he said. Monica and my wedding day. I burst into tears. In the middle of a dark conspiracy, something real still existed. Uncle Robert believed in us, and Adrian had kept our wedding day in his mind through the entire nightmare. Detective Wu left to coordinate with the search team. A nurse came in to check Adrian's vital signs. When she left, we were alone again. Adrian looked at me for a long time, then asked softly, Monica, do you hate me? I looked at him, the man I had loved for 27 years, the man I had cared for through the longest 6 years of my life, the man who lay silent every night while I cried beside him, the man who watched me wither without being able to speak. I swallowed hard. I don't know what I'm supposed to feel. I'm angry, I'm in pain, but I also understand you did it to protect me. I destroyed your life, he whispered. Not you, I said, squeezing his hand tighter. Felicia. Dorian. Kiana. They're the ones who destroyed our lives. You're a victim too, just like me. But you could have died, I cut him off. If you didn't cooperate, I could have died too. You did what you thought was right to keep us safe. We sat in silence for a moment. The heart monitor beeped steadily, like a cold counting of time. From now on, what happens to us? Adrian asked, his voice weary. I don't know, I said honestly. But at least now we have the truth. And we have the police. We're not alone anymore. My phone buzzed, an unknown number. I stared at the screen, hesitated, then answered. Hello, Mrs. Price, this is Sergeant Rodriguez from the search team. We're at the house on Don Lorenzo Drive. We found the safe, and we're opening it. My heart slammed. Are there documents inside? Yes, ma'am, a lot. Contracts, photographs, USB drives, accounting ledgers. This is a major corruption case. I exhaled. For the first time in days, I felt relief. Thank you. I hung up. Adrian looked at me, a fragile thread of hope in his eyes. They found it? They found it, I said. Evidence to convict everyone who did this to us. But the moment those words left my mouth, relief turned instantly into a cold, sharp fear. Adrian, if they know we found the evidence... Adrian looked straight at me and understood immediately. They'll be desperate. And desperate people, I said softly, do dangerous things. As if to prove it, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Detective Wu. Mrs. Price, we have a situation. Felicia and Dorian are not at any of their known addresses. We didn't find them. I shot to my feet. What does that mean? It means they may have been warned about the investigation. Someone leaked information. Who? We're determining that now, Detective Wu said quickly. It could be hospital staff, or a link inside the force tied to the corruption network. Networks like this are wider than you think. Cold ran down my spine. So, are we safe? I'm increasing protection on his room. And Mrs. Price, I think you should stay at the hospital. Don't go home alone. I ended the call and looked at Adrian. The fear in his eyes mirrored the fear in my own chest exactly. They're running, I whispered. Adrian gave a small nod. And when a beast is cornered, it's the most dangerous, I finished, my voice nearly gone. The long night ahead promised no sleep, only vigilance, only waiting. And one question hung in the air, one no one dared to speak out loud. Will they come for us tonight? The night at UCLA Medical Center, where they transferred us for security reasons, was long and suffocating. Adrian lay in a new hospital bed, still weak but alert. I sat beside him, my back rigid with tension. Outside the door, 2 police officers stood guard like shadows, reminding me that our enemy was still out there somewhere. Around 2 a.m, Adrian suddenly spoke. He had been silent for hours, the silence of someone holding a secret, not to hide it from me, but because he was afraid that saying it would break me. Monica, there's one more thing you need to know. About Tony. I jolted upright, every sense pulled tight as a wire. About her? Adrian hesitated for a long time, then said it as if forcing himself to the very end. Tony, she isn't your biological sister, right? She was adopted. I stopped, then nodded. Yes, my family took Tony in through the foster care system when she was 8, but I've always loved her like a real sister. Why are you asking? Adrian lowered his voice, heavy with weight. Because Tony and I aren't related by blood. And in the years she came to help you take care of me, my heart dropped straight to the bottom. Adrian, what are you saying? He exhaled as if swallowing stones. You were always tired, always exhausted. I lay there pretending to sleep, but I heard everything. I heard you crying in the bathroom, heard you whispering how lonely you were. I wanted to stop him, but my throat locked up. Tony saw that, Adrian continued. She stayed later. She talked to you more. And with me, she often sat by the bed when you were asleep. She talked to me. Because she knew I could hear. A cold wave ran from the base of my skull down my spine. I forced myself to ask, even though I didn't want the answer. Did something happen between you and her? Adrian lowered his head. The night before Tony disappeared, You were sleeping deeply in the bedroom. Tony was in the kitchen. I heard her crying." He paused, then said the thing that stunned me. "Somehow, I moved. I went numb." "I don't understand. You said you couldn't move." "I could, a little," Adrian confessed, "when Felicia and Dorian weren't watching, when the dosage dropped. But I didn't dare move much. That night, I was desperate. I needed someone to know the truth. And you told Tony?" Adrian nodded. She ran to me. I only managed to whisper a few words. "Help me. They poisoned me. Monica is in danger." Tony was shocked. She held me, crying. And then I stood still, feeling the room waiting for me to ask what came next. I knew something horrific lived behind that silence, but I still had to hear it. "Then what?" My voice was so small it barely counted as speech. Adrian's voice rasped. "She kissed me. She said she had loved me from the first time she met me at our wedding. She knew it was wrong, but she couldn't control it." Tears ran down my face. "And you?" Adrian choked. I kissed her back." The pain was so sharp I had to turn toward the window. The city of Los Angeles blurred beyond the glass, drowned in tears. In the darkness, Adrian's voice broke apart. In that moment, someone believed me, looked at me like a person, not a patient. "I was weak, Monica. I'm sorry." I bit down hard just to stay upright. "What happened after that?" Tony promised she would look into it. "She said she would find evidence, go to the police," Adrian said. "But the following week, Tony disappeared." My throat went numb. "Felicia showed me photos of Tony being beaten," Adrian went on. "They said if I didn't keep cooperating, they would kill Tony and you." I spun back, eyes burning. "And now you're saying she was pregnant?" Adrian nodded slowly. 2 months after Tony disappeared, Felicia whispered it to me. She said Tony was pregnant, said the child was mine. His grip tightened on the blanket. Felicia even laughed and said, "Your brother is really something. Cheating with your wife's sister while pretending to be paralyzed." I looked straight at Adrian. There was no place left to hide. "So Lucas, is he your son?" Adrian shook his head, helpless. "I don't know for sure. I've never met the child, but Felicia said it. She said she kept Tony alive long enough to give birth, and then she would take the baby." "Why?" I exploded. "Why would Felicia want your child?" Adrian's voice was heavy as lead. "Because she can't have children. After she got married, she found out she was infertile. Her husband left. Felicia always wanted a child, but she couldn't. Disgust rose in me like bile. And when she found out Tony was pregnant with, I couldn't even say the words, my husband. She saw an opportunity." Adrian nodded. "A child with Price blood, a child she could raise as her own." Just then, the door flew open. Detective Elaine Wu stepped in, her expression grave. "We have new information. Felicia Price has made multiple calls to an address in Big Bear Lake over the past 2 years." I froze. Detective Wu explained, "We believe Dorian has a cabin there, and we think Tony may still be held there." I blurted out, almost unable to believe my own ears. "She might still be alive?" "We don't know yet," Detective Wu said. "But the most recent call was 3 days ago, right before you brought your husband to the hospital, meaning someone is still at that cabin." Adrian tried to sit up, eyes reddening. "We have to go. If Tony is alive, a tactical team is preparing." Detective Wu cut in. "We raid at dawn. Mr. Price, you need to stay here to recover." "No," Adrian said firmly. "If Tony is there, if my child is there, I have to go." I protested. "Adrian, you're just starting to recover. You can't—" "I've been lying still for 6 years, Monica." He looked straight at me. 6 years I let other people decide for me. This time I have to act." Detective Wu nodded. "Fine, but you'll remain outside the perimeter with medical staff. Only when the scene is secure will you be allowed in." Then she turned to me. "Mrs. Price, you should go as well. If Tony is there, she'll need a familiar face." Before we left the hospital, I realized the most terrifying thing wasn't gunfire or a cabin in the woods, and it wasn't Felicia or Dorian. It was the moment I would have to face Tony. If Tony truly was still alive, I would have to hold the sister I loved like flesh and blood, the one who betrayed me, but who might also have endured hell to save my husband. And if Lucas truly was Adrian's child, then that child would be living proof of a family wound none of us had prepared to survive. We left at 4 a.m, 4 unmarked vehicles, tactical police, snipers, everything like a real operation. Adrian and I rode with 2 medical staff and Detective Wu. Almost no one spoke the entire drive. As we left Los Angeles, the road climbed into the mountains, and I thought only of Tony, the girl I had loved like my own blood, who might have been locked for 2 years inside a strange cabin. Adrian asked softly, "Do you hate her?" I stayed silent for a long time. "I don't know. She betrayed me, but she also tried to save you, and if she's been imprisoned for 2 years, giving birth in those conditions—" My voice broke. Adrian squeezed my hand. "Monica, if we find Tony, if Lucas really is my son, then we'll deal with it," I said, though I had no idea how. And then I forced myself to speak like a vow, just to keep from collapsing. The child is innocent. No matter what happened between us, Lucas is innocent. Adrian gripped my hand tighter. "You're still the best woman I've ever known." When we reached Big Bear Lake, the sky began to pale. Dorian's cabin sat isolated in the pine forest. The lake shimmered under dawn. Detective Wu lifted binoculars. "There's light inside, at least one vehicle parked outside, a black SUV. Dorian's," Adrian said immediately. Detective Wu spoke into the radio. "All units take positions, snipers cover the exits, entry team hold for the signal." We waited. Each second stretched into an hour. Sweat dotted Adrian's forehead. His hand clenched so tight it went white. Then suddenly a scream tore out of the cabin, followed by the sound of shattering glass. Detective Wu shouted into the radio, "Go! Go! Go!" Everything exploded within seconds. Commands, running footsteps, chaos. And then, gunfire. 2. Then 3 sharp shots punching straight into my chest. "Oh, God!" I gasped, gripping Adrian as if he were the only thing keeping me upright. The radio crackled. "Perimeter secure. 2 suspects neutralized, 1 suspect wounded. 2 hostages unharmed. Repeat, 2 hostages unharmed." An officer approached. "Scene is secured. Hostages are in the back room." Detective Wu turned to us. "Stay here. Let me check first." But the moment she moved, the cabin door burst open. An officer stepped out, guiding a woman with him. From far away, I recognized her instantly. Tony, gaunt, long hair tangled, an oversized shirt swallowing her frame. But she was my sister. I threw open the car door and ran. "Tony!" Tony lifted her head, eyes wide. "Monica?" We clung to each other like drowning people reaching shore. Tony trembled violently and broke into sobs. "You came," she repeated again and again like a prayer. I held her shoulders and searched her face. "Are you okay? Did they hurt you?" Tony stepped back half a pace, eyes blazing red. "Sis, I have a baby, Lucas." "He's in there. He's okay, but he's scared." "Take me to him," I said immediately. We went into the cabin. Inside was a raw scene. Dorian lay on the floor, covered, dead. Felicia sat in a chair in handcuffs, blood soaking her shoulder, her face shocked and full of rage. But I didn't look at them for long. I rushed to the back room, where a medic was holding a child, a little boy about 2 years old, brown skin, big eyes like Adrian's. A smile like Tony's. "Lucas," Tony called, her voice breaking. "Mama's here." The child reached toward Tony and burst into crying. Tony gathered him up, kissing his head as if afraid that if she let go, he would vanish. Adrian entered after that, supported by medical staff. He looked at Tony, then at the child. "Tony," he said, choking. "Adrian," Tony sobbed, You can walk now." "They stopped giving me the medication," Adrian replied. Lucas stared at Adrian with curious eyes. Tony bent down and whispered in her child's ear, "That's your mom's friend." But I saw the pain in her eyes. She couldn't say, "That's your father?" Not in front of me. Detective Wu stepped in, her voice turning cold and professional again. "Mrs. Moore, we need to take you and your child to the hospital for evaluation." Tony nodded, then suddenly turned to me and asked like a knife, "Where's Kiana?" "Our sister?" I froze. Tony looked straight at me as if she had known the answer for a long time. She was involved too, wasn't she? I hadn't even answered when an officer came in. "Detective Wu, we just arrested Kiana Moore in Los Angeles. She's being transported to the station." Tony shut her eyes, as if all strength had been drained from her. 3 sisters, one family torn apart by greed, betrayal, and secrets that even at the very end still demanded blood. 3 days after the rescue at Big Bear Lake, I was sitting again in the waiting room of UCLA Medical Center. No more sirens, no more radios crackling, no more damp wood smell from a cabin deep in the forest. Only cold white lights, the dragging sound of shoes across the floor, and the stinging scent of disinfectant clinging to my skin like a reminder that this still wasn't over. Adrian was in physical therapy, learning how to walk again after 6 years. His muscles had weakened, but in his eyes I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time: the will to live. Tony and Lucas were on the pediatric floor for general examinations. Lucas slept a lot, and he startled easily at loud noises. Every time it happened, Tony would panic and pull him tight against her chest, as if she feared that the moment she loosened her arms, someone would snatch her child away again. And me? I just sat there, both hands resting on my knees, trying to understand what my new life even was. A life where my husband was starting to stand, but my marriage could no longer stand the way it used to. A life where my sister had been found, but my trust had been torn apart. A life where the truth rose to the surface, dragging up even more truths that hurt worse. Right then, Detective Elaine Wu approached. In her hands was a thick file folder, hard cover, as if it contained an entire city rotting from the inside. "Mrs. Price," she said, her voice steady but heavy, "I have updates." I looked up immediately. "Felicia?" "She's cooperating fully in exchange for a reduced sentence," Detective Wu replied. "She has named 27 officials in the city of Los Angeles connected to the corruption network. This will be one of the biggest scandals in the city's history." I heard it and didn't know what I was supposed to feel. Relief? Disgust? Rage that 6 years of my life had been used as a tool to cover up a swamp? "And Kiana?" I asked, and just speaking my sister's name made my stomach tighten. Detective Wu sat down beside me. "That's why I'm here. Your sister wants to see you." "She's being held at county." I swallowed hard. "I don't know if I can face her." Detective Wu looked straight at me, her eyes not forcing me, but not leaving me an exit either. "I understand," she said. "But Kiana says there's something you need to know. About Tony." The visitation room at the detention facility was cold to the bone. The smell of disinfectant was sharp and overwhelming. The ceiling lights were brutally bright, exposing every line of exhaustion on people's faces. Kiana sat across from me behind thick glass, orange uniform, hands cuffed. Hair messy, face hollow, eyes red from lack of sleep and, maybe from guilt, my sister, the one who used to hold me when I fell apart, now sitting there like a stranger wearing the most familiar face of my life. Kiana lifted the phone. Her hoarse voice came through the speaker. "Monica, thank you for coming." I didn't return the greeting. I kept my voice cold to protect myself. "You have 10 minutes. Detective Wu said you had something I needed to know." Kiana nodded, and tears immediately spilled over. "About Tony," she said. "You have to know. I didn't want to hurt her. They promised me they would only keep Tony until the baby was born. They said they would let her go after that." I looked at Kiana the way you look at someone trying to wipe blood off their hands with a few sentences. But they didn't let her go, did they? I asked. Kiana shook her head, her lips trembling. Felicia changed her mind. After Lucas was born, she was afraid Tony would go to the police. Kiana swallowed. And Dorian, he said the easiest way was to solve the problem. I exploded, my voice cracking with fury. You let them kill Tony? No, Kiana sobbed. I stopped them. I said if they killed Tony, I would go to the police. That's why Tony is still alive. Because of me. I froze. One part of me wanted to smash the glass. Another part of me wanted to laugh because it hurt too much. I leaned closer to the phone, each word cold as a knife. You want me to thank you? For not letting them kill our sister? Kiana recoiled as if she'd been slapped. She shook her head over and over. No, I don't deserve that. I just want you to know. I'm not a monster. I was just weak. Kiana choked on a sob. I needed money for my kids, and when I realized I'd gone too far, it was already too late. I stared straight into my sister's eyes. You had a choice at every step, I said, but you chose money over family. Kiana dropped her head and cried hard, her shoulders shaking uncontrollably. I know, she said, her voice broken. I'll live with it for the rest of my life. But Monica, you need to know one more thing. I tightened my grip on the phone. What? Kiana looked up. Her eyes were red, but her gaze was strange, like fear, as if what she was about to say would leave me with no way back. Lucas, Kiana said, that baby may not only possibly be Adrian's son. My heart hammered so violently my ears rang. What are you saying? Tony was pregnant before Adrian and Tony had that moment, Kiana said, each word dropping like stones. I went still. Keep talking. Tony had a boyfriend, a man named Marcus. They dated for 6 months, then broke up 3 months before Tony disappeared. Kiana wiped tears with her cuffed wrist. I know because Tony told me. The room spun. So Lucas could be Marcus's child, could be Adrian's. No one knows for sure, Kiana said. Tony was 2 months pregnant when she was kidnapped. 2 weeks after that was when what happened with Adrian took place. I went rigid, as if I'd been pulled out of my own body. Why are you telling me this? I asked, my voice dry and cracked. Kiana looked at me through the glass, her voice small, like she was begging for mercy. Because you deserve the full truth before you decide what you're going to do with your marriage, she said. If Lucas is Adrian's, that's one thing. But if he isn't... She didn't finish the sentence. But I heard it clearly in the space she left behind. If he isn't, then everything is twice as complicated. On the way out of the detention center, I don't remember how many doors I passed through, how many checkpoints, how many metal locks clattered behind me. I only remember one thing, the feeling that I was holding 2 shards of truth in my hands. One shard said Kiana betrayed the family for money. One shard said Lucas might not be Adrian's son. And the most terrifying part was, no matter which shard was true, I would still bleed. Because if Lucas was Adrian's son, I would have to live with betrayal inside my marriage. And if Lucas wasn't Adrian's son, I would have to live with the fact that Adrian endured hell for a child who didn't carry his blood. But no matter what, Lucas was still a child, and children should not be the price adults pay for adult sins. I found Tony in a women's wardroom. Lucas was asleep in the crib beside the bed. Tony sat with her back toward the window, staring outside, as if trying to remember the world from before she was locked in that cabin. She had grown thinner, but she looked cleaner. The doctors had cut her hair. They had given her new clothes. The bruises on her wrists were fading, but her eyes still held the darkness of 2 years in captivity. "Tony," I called softly. She turned, startled for a moment. "Monica, I didn't think you'd want to see me." I walked in and pulled a chair beside the bed. My voice was so calm it surprised even me. "We need to talk," I said. "About Lucas." Tony's eyes tightened immediately. "What do you want to say?" I didn't circle around it. I was too tired to avoid it anymore. "Who is his father? Really?" Tony stayed silent for a long time, so long I could hear the air conditioner, hear Lucas's breathing from the crib. Finally, Tony exhaled, like dropping a boulder from her chest. "I don't know for sure," she said. "There was a man named Marcus. We dated for 6 months, but he didn't want commitment. We broke up in February. I found out I was pregnant in April." Tony lowered her head. "He could be the father." I nodded slowly. "And Adrian?" Tony closed her eyes, her voice smaller. "May. One night. One weak moment." She opened her eyes and looked at me as if she feared I would slap her. "If Lucas was born full term," Tony said, "then he could be Adrian's. But if he was born a little early, he could be Marcus's." I drew a deep breath. "Have you done a DNA test?" Tony shook her head. "Felicia wouldn't allow it," she said. "She wanted to believe Lucas was her nephew through Adrian. She didn't want to know the truth." I studied Tony carefully. "But do you want to know?" Tony looked at Lucas. The child slept peacefully, lips slightly pursed, one hand curled into a small fist. "Sometimes I'm afraid to know," Tony whispered. "If he's Adrian's, that means I destroyed your marriage." Tony choked. "But if he isn't, that means Adrian suffered through all of this, for a child who isn't his." I felt every word like needles. But then I looked at Lucas, and I heard my own words again, the words I had said to Adrian earlier. I spoke slowly, clearly, like a rope to pull both of us back from the edge. Or it means Lucas is just a child who needs to be loved, no matter who his father is. Tony stared at me, shocked, as if she had heard something that didn't belong to this world. You don't hate me." I stayed silent for one beat, long enough for the truth to stand between us, unpainted and unsoftened. "I do hate you," I said bluntly. "You betrayed me. You slept with my husband." Tony broke into sobs, both hands covering her face, but I didn't stop there because I couldn't deny the rest. "But you're also a victim," I continued, my voice lower. "You were held for 2 years. You gave birth in that cabin with no doctor. And now you have a baby who depends on you." Tony sobbed. "I don't know what to do. I have no money, no home, nothing. How am I supposed to raise Lucas?" I looked at her trembling hands, and before I could think, I reached out and took Tony's hand. It was a gesture that 3 days earlier I would have sworn I could never make. "We'll find a way," I said, steadier than my own emotions. "But first, we need to know the truth." Tony looked at me, eyes swollen and red. "About Lucas," I said. "He deserves to know who his father is." Behind me, the door opened quietly. I didn't turn around, but I felt a figure standing there, as if this conversation, sooner or later, would have to be spoken in front of Adrian. And I knew the hardest part still hadn't come. 2 weeks later, the DNA test results finally came back. Dr. Reena Patel called all 3 of us, Adrian, Tony, and me, into her office at UCLA Medical Center. Her office smelled faintly of paperwork and coffee, the lighting was white, and it was so neat and orderly it only made my heart feel even more tangled. I sat beside Adrian. Tony sat across from us. Her hands were clasped together, squeezed so tight they turned white, as if the moment she let go, everything would collapse. Dr. Patel held an envelope and looked at us for a long time before she spoke. "The results are clear," she said, calm but careful. "Lucas is not Adrian's biological child." The room fell into silence. I felt Adrian exhale in relief right beside me, a breath like someone being pulled above water after being submerged for far too long. But at the same time, I heard Tony crying without sound. Not the kind of cry that breaks into screams, the kind that makes your chest ache, your throat tighten, and still the tears keep falling. "So, his father is Marcus," Tony whispered, as if speaking to herself. Right then, Detective Elaine Wu, also present in the room, stepped forward gently. "We contacted Marcus Chen using the information you provided," she said. "He agreed to be tested. He is Lucas's father with a probability of 99.9%. Tony looked up, eyes red and swollen. "Does he want to meet his son?" Her voice trembled as if she were standing on the edge of a cliff. Detective Wu nodded. "He was shocked, but he agreed to meet you next week. He also agreed to provide child support." Tony lowered her head, covering her mouth to hold back a sob. I looked at her, then at Adrian. I thought Adrian's relief would feel like a knife to Tony, but strangely, in that moment I realized everyone was hurting in their own way. Adrian was relieved he wasn't Lucas's father, but the guilt from that weak moment was still there. Tony hurt because of the truth, and she hurt because she finally had to face responsibility without being able to hide behind Felicia's shadow anymore. And me. I stood between them, like someone who had escaped the storm but still had the smell of rain in her hair. A month later, Adrian and I sat in a marriage counseling room at First AME Church. Pastor Jenkins sat across from us, his hands cupped together, his voice low and warm like church bells on a Sunday morning. "After everything you've been through," he said, "what do you want for the future?" Adrian looked at me first. His eyes were no longer the eyes of a patient. They were the eyes of a man who had been handed his life back and was terrified of losing what was left. "I want my wife to be happy," Adrian said. "If that means without me, I understand." I took his hand, feeling real warmth, something I had almost forgotten over the past 6 years. Then I let go gently, like releasing something I once clung to just to survive, but now couldn't hold forever. "Adrian," I said slowly, letting each word land where it belonged. "I love you. I've loved you for 27 years. Adrian bowed his head, tears rolling down. "But the past 6 years changed us," I continued. "I became a caregiver, not a wife anymore." "And you became a patient, not a husband anymore." "We can learn how to love each other again," Adrian said, his voice breaking, like he was begging for a miracle. "Maybe," I nodded, "but I'm not sure I want that." I took a deep breath, then said the thing I had feared most even thinking about, because saying it meant I would have to live with it. "I need to find myself again," I said. "Monica before I became a caregiver." "The Monica who left teaching, left friends, left everything." Pastor Jenkins nodded, his eyes kind, but not turning away from the truth. "Sometimes true love," he said, "is knowing when to let go." I turned to Adrian, my voice softer, but not retreating. "I don't want a divorce fueled by anger," I said. "I want us to part with respect, with gratitude for what we had, and with hope that one day we can be friends." Adrian nodded, tears falling without stopping. "You deserve happiness, Monica," he said, "even if that happiness doesn't include me." 6 months after that fateful day at Cedars-Sinai, I sat in a courtroom at Los Angeles County Superior Court. A courtroom is different from a hospital in one way. A hospital heals the body, but a courtroom peels the skin off the truth in front of everyone. Felicia Price stood before the judge to receive her sentence. No more arrogance, no more fake smile, only an empty woman trying to stand upright. The judge looked down at the file, his voice clear with every word. "Mrs. Price, you have pleaded guilty to kidnapping, fraud, and conspiracy. In light of your cooperation with prosecutors in the larger corruption case, the court sentences you to 25 years in federal prison." Felicia lowered her head, as if she finally understood. There are years you steal from others. That must be repaid with your own life. A week later, it was Kiana's turn in court. Because she stopped Tony from being killed and cooperated with the investigation, she received a lighter sentence, 12 years, possibly reduced to 8 for good behavior. As Kiana was let out, she turned back to look at me. "Monica," she called, her voice hoarse and small. I stood and walked closer. For the first time since Big Bear Lake, we faced each other without glass between us. "I'm sorry," Kiana said. "I know that isn't enough, but—" I didn't let her finish. I hugged Kiana, just a short hug, but real. I whispered, just loud enough for her to hear, "I hate what you did, but you're still my sister." "When you get out, we'll find a way to heal." Kiana cried like a child, and this time I didn't turn away. And if you've listened this far, please give me one small thing. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next stories. Stories about betrayal, justice, and how a person stands back up after being pushed all the way to the bottom. You subscribe not only to support the channel, but to remind yourself that dawn always comes, even after the longest night. 6 months later, I stood in a new elementary classroom in Culver City. 22 young pairs of eyes looked at me with curiosity and innocence. I had returned to teaching, the work I once loved, and also the self I once lost. "Good morning, class," I said, and realized this was the first real smile I'd had in years. That evening, I returned to a small apartment in Inglewood, an apartment that belonged only to me. No hospital bed, no beeping machines. No medication, no care schedules, no nights curled up on a sofa. Just me, a cup of tea, and a novel I read because I wanted to, not because I was reading aloud for someone else. My phone buzzed. A message from Adrian. "Today was good. The new architecture studio got its first project, affordable housing in Compton. I think Uncle Robert would be proud. Hope you're doing well, too." I smiled and typed back, "He would definitely be proud of you. I'm well." My students asked today why I smile so much. I told them, because I finally found myself again. Another message came in from Tony. "Lucas said Auntie Monica today. Marcus and I are learning how to co-parent. It's not easy, but we're trying. Thank you for everything." I set my phone down and walked to the window. Los Angeles shimmered with lights, a city that had once been my prison, now becoming the place where I was free. People ask me, "Do you regret it? 6 years of being deceived?" I answer, no, because those years taught me that I am stronger than I thought, but I am also allowed to be weak. Family is not blood, it is the choice to love. Forgiveness is not forgetting, it is freeing yourself. And most of all, I deserve happiness. My name is Monica Price. Now Monica Davis. I took back my maiden name. I am a Black woman who walked through hell and found my own way back into the light. I am a survivor. I am a victor, and my story is still continuing.